9, 12, 10, 28, 2, 23.
This is the DSR Podcast. Hello and welcome to DSR's Words Matter. I'm David Rothkopf and I'm joined as always by Norm Ornstein. How are you, Norm?
I'm doing all right, I guess, David. As you know, as we are doing this, we are in the middle of a torrential rainstorm here in Washington. And that's a little bit of a metaphor for where we are as a country right now, I guess.
Well, that's true. And I don't want to bring you down further, but, you know, I note to everybody who is listening to this that less than a week ago, we had heinous acts of violence in Minnesota, which is Norm's home state. And I followed some of your comments on it. And frankly, Norm, I was rather moved because I know you took it very hard, as did a lot of people I know who are from Minnesota. So I thought we should start there and get your perspective on what happened, but also on what you think it means.
So, as you say, I was shattered by this, David, and for a whole host of reasons. I really didn't know Melissa Hortman very well, but I knew her, and I've been around Minnesota politicians a lot, and it was absolutely shocking and stunning. It's also one of those things when you realize that this guy, who, by the way, had an arsenal in his faux police car that was astonishing. A large number of assault rifles and other weapons, a huge amount of ammunition. He clearly had on his list of 70, and with his flyers for the No Kings demonstrations, which some, I'll return to this, but some right-wingers vilely tried to turn into him as a supporter of the demonstrations when it was clear that he was going to go and do mass mayhem. This is a man who wanted to go out killing large numbers of people. And it's a reflection of our times, I'm afraid, and of an administration and a culture that now do not shrink from violence. That's part of it. For me also, as a Minnesotan, having seen over many decades a state that, one, had its own checkered at best history. If you read the biographies of Hubert Humphrey, for example, and there are a number of them, and if you live there back in an earlier era, Minnesota was a hotbed of racism and anti-Semitism, Minneapolis in particular. Hubert Humphrey, when he came in as a political figure, and my grandfather, my late grandfather, was a labor leader and was one of the small group that drew him into politics to running for mayor, was a part of this massive effort to try and clean things up and turn it around. And when I grew up there in the 1960s, 50s, 60s, it was a model for the rest of the country on civil discourse, two parties that were different, but not dramatically far apart, and filled with honorable people you could admire and view as role models. When I was at the University of Minnesota, for example, we had seminars, and one of the people I became quite close to was a Republican who'd served as Attorney General named Doug Head, and was just a totally admirable figure, thoughtful, deep, decent, center-right, but more center than anything else. Just the kind of person you'd want in public service. And we had decades of figures that you could admire, governors, senators, who were what you'd want. Two parties that really worked to solve problems and work together. That began to change, and it changed before a lot of other states, I would say. In some ways, to use the cliche, Minnesota was like the canary in the coal mine. When you started to see figures like Michelle Bachmann emerge and get notoriety, you could see that this was going from a party of the Doug Heads and Arnie Carlsons and David Dernbergers of the world to the radical populist lunatics. And that's where the Republican Party gravitated to, including before most others. It's the party of Pete Hegseth, for example. Um, and, to see it devolve into this, including right after, with an evenly divided legislature. Minnesota, frankly, is not a blue state, even though it's voted pretty consistently for Democrats for president. It is a purple state, and the state legislature is evenly divided, tied in one house, close to that in the other, and facing deep adversity because of Trump's cuts in the federal budget and issues of their own. They still managed to find a way to come together in a bipartisan fashion and do a budget. And Melissa Hortman was a core part of that. She was one who tried to bring everybody together, even facing all of that adversity. And to see this happen, and to see not just what happened to Melissa and her husband, but when you have a state senator who is shot 9 times and his wife 8 times, and she's shot because she fell on her daughter to keep her daughter from being shot. When you see that this guy didn't just kill Melissa and her husband, but also the family dog. And also that he went to other houses first, and because they weren't home, ended up at Melissa's. It's frightening. And among my comments, besides we can get to this, what vile Mike Lee has done, and a continued refusal to apologize or to even consider that what he did was despicable and completely out of bounds. And despite the fact that not more than 1 or 2 Republicans in the Senate have even said mild things to try and distinguish themselves from him. What disturbs me as much as anything, David, is that when you get Mike Lee and others who are not in office making fun of political assassinations, it gives a green light to others who are out there, lunatics or people who have just come to believe with the cult that these are their opposition is evil and trying to destroy America and its way of life. It's going to make it easier for others to engage in these despicable acts, and easy because there's so much easy access to guns. How can one person get an arsenal that would be enough to basically furnish a platoon out there? All of this made me physically ill.
Well, let me pull back the camera in two increments and touch upon things you've touched upon here, because I think they're both important and deserve their focus, or deserve some focus from us. First is this: Donald Trump has made violence a centerpiece of the MAGA movement.
Yes.
And while I heard some people, including some good Minnesotans, say, let's not politicize this, let's not count how many right-wing extremist attacks there have been versus how many left-wing extremist attacks. The reality is there aren't left-wing extremist attacks. There are primarily right-wing extremist attacks. And what's more, while there have always been acts of political violence, since Donald Trump entered the picture, there's a really disturbing pattern of Trump supporters hearing what he has to say and taking it as license to use that violence. And of course, January 6th is an example of this. Other attacks that have occurred across the country are an example of this. Uh, and when you listen to Trump's words, when you go back, you may recall with a speech a long time ago, he talked about his Second Amendment people with regard to Hillary Clinton once. You know, his Second Amendment people, meaning the people he's got who, like you just referred to, um, have too many guns. Um, and he's constantly trying to call them to arms. He talks about using the police more violently against people. It's part of this cult, and it's now part of our political culture across the country. And to be honest with you, you know, Minnesota nice is a thing. I know a lot of people from Minnesota. They're, like you, they're friendly, good people. They may have political differences. The first person I ever met in politics, I was young, was Hubert Humphrey. I remember hosting a dinner once on anti-Semitism in Washington, where our guest was Paul Wellstone, a senator from there. I know you know Al Franken, and I've known him. I know one of my best friends, Tom Friedman, to the Times columnist, is from Minnesota, and talks about how the state has embraced new immigrants like the Hmong and other groups of people in and around Minneapolis. And so it's particularly shocking to me as an outsider, not just that the violence has taken place, but that the toxin of MAGA has spread into every crevice of life in the United States. And I don't even think we fully appreciate the consequences yet, even after an insurrection, even after murders like this.
You know, just to embellish a little bit, I remember during Trump's first campaign in 2016, when he said at one of his rallies of a heckler or somebody who took issue with him, "I'd like to punch him in the face." I remember those rallies where he encouraged his followers to go after, intimidate, and even threaten violence against the press corps who were in the pen there watching the rally. That was a feature, not a bug, of his run in 2016. Then you get to January 6th, and you get to one, before everybody stormed the Capitol. What we know is that when he had the rally near the White House, he told the Secret Service to take down the metal detectors so that the Proud Boys and Oath Keepers and others who were there with weapons wouldn't have them confiscated. We know that he pardoned every violent figure who assaulted police, killed people, and trashed the Capitol, which was giving a green light to even more violence. And then, frankly, we see, and it sickens me that we've become deadened to this. People without markings, wearing hoodies and masks, grabbing people off the street, throwing them into vans and taking them away. I refer to this regularly as American Gestapo. We don't know who these people are. We have no clue as to whether they actually have official titles. But what we do know is that even when the Nazis were rounding up people, they kept a record of who they were and where they are. We know that they've picked up, whether by accident or design, American citizens who've been disappeared. They aren't able to talk to lawyers or family, and we don't even know where they are. When you get into a situation like that, where the country sees this happening every day, the press corps doesn't treat it as a 4-alarm or 5-alarm fire, it deadens us to some of those realities, and it again makes violence more viable for people who don't like what's going on. Now, I agree with you. There have been left-wing murderers and violent demonstrators. They're a tiny fraction compared to what we see on the right. And sometimes what we see is people, the one who shot at Trump and killed the one person at his rally. We learned afterwards that he could just as easily have gone after Joe Biden. This was somebody who wanted to make a name for himself, obviously a deeply troubled person. And it just so happened that Trump was the one who showed up at a rally nearby. So there are people who do violent acts or murders not because they have a political motive, but when we get the ones that occur with a political motive, they're overwhelmingly on the right. And you would hope, put Donald Trump for the moment aside, put his cabinet for the moment aside, the idea that not a single Republican senator condemned what happened to their own colleague, Alex Padilla, roughed up, manhandled, thrown to the floor, and handcuffed at trying to simply ask a question of Kristi Noem at a press conference. This was an affront against the Senate. They say nothing. When you have a House member charged with bogus crimes, and the Republicans in the House, instead of standing up for their own body, say nothing, or a speaker who says that the figures in the Democratic Party ought to be tarred and feathered, you realize that we have a right wing now, including those in elective office, who are going to do nothing to condemn violence and plenty to encourage it against their adversaries. It's truly frightening.
It is frightening, and that brings me to sort of the second element of this. And again, it's something you touched upon. And frankly, it's something we could touch upon every week here, but we've never done a deep dive on it. And that is the Republican gun cult. Yeah. The reality is, of course, the Second Amendment does not in any way assure that everybody can have every weapon all the time. Indeed, it probably doesn't even guarantee everybody the right to a gun. It has been said by a Chief Justice of the Supreme Court that it's one of the biggest frauds perpetrated on the American people, because it is obviously, in its language, very specifically pertaining to arming people who are part of militias, which was part of the social self-defense fabric of an 18th century society, using muzzle-loading weapons, completely different in every respect from what weapons are today. But this has been built and built and built into something where you do have people like this, and that we have in this country more guns than we have people. And I think there's 360 million Americans, and there's 400 or 500 million guns in this country. But among those people, 2% have something like more than 10 guns each. In other words, there's a very small segment of the American population that has arsenals like the ones that you're talking about. And often those arsenals include things like assault weapons, weapons that use large magazines that can hold many bullets, and in many cases worse. And this administration, like past Republican administration, has perpetuated the nonsensical theory that not only is this a right, but that you need weapons of war to go deer hunting. Crazy, absolute craziness. The Democratic response has been, I think, stunningly weak. Historically, Democrats run and say, well, yeah, I'm a gun owner myself. Kamala Harris ran and said that. But, and I believe everybody has a right to a gun because they're afraid of engaging on this issue. But I think, interestingly, the door may be opening to new ways to engage on it. And I would look to the comments made during recent discussions regarding presidential power by Sonia Sotomayor on the Supreme Court, who said, well, if you give the president sweeping powers like this, what if a Democratic president comes in and bans the use of guns? and where does that take you? And of course, using the techniques of this administration, a Democratic president could come in and say, not ban the use of guns, but say no assault weapons, but just by executive order. And with the way this court is going, you could end up requiring, all the appellate courts in the United States to rule against it before it has an effect. And that's what Trump is doing. He's trying to get these things where it takes a long time to work out, and during that period, he's got the benefit of his order, whether it's legal or not. And so I'm wondering, what should the response be to this pathology in the United States today about guns?
Absolutely a pathology. And I have to say, David, that if you go back and look at the record, we have justices who are supposed to be originalists and strict constructionists. There is a wonderful book on the first Congress. And remember, the first Congress is the one that passed the Bill of Rights, the first 10 amendments to the Constitution that enshrined in law, and this is the Second Amendment. And that book by a historian named Fergus Bordewick talks about, a lot of it is about how the first Congress was not filled with giants. They were average people, in some cases not particularly admirable. But they did a terrific job knowing that history was going to judge whether this kind of government was going to continue by what they did. But what we know from that book and the extensive record of that Congress is that they had a debate on those 10 amendments to the Constitution. And Madison was a part of that Congress. It wasn't, that they hadn't included them in the original Constitution because they thought it was a given. Everybody knew this. But what we know is the debate that they had on the Second Amendment on guns had some extensive discussions all around one element of that amendment, the well-regulated militia. The discussion was not about how this meant everybody could have guns and whatever guns they wanted. It was about how and why they would define a militia. And of course, the reason that they put this amendment in the first place is we know in the early days of the Republic, there was a lot of internal dissent. We had the Whiskey Rebellion. We had potential for others internally to try and overthrow the government. We're discontented for a variety of reasons. We had gotten rid of and disbanded the Continental Army, and we needed to have some form of protection in case a foreign government tried to take us over again. That was the whole reason for the Second Amendment. And when you look at the Heller decision and you look at the decisions the Supreme Court has made, these originalists effectively erase the clause of the Second Amendment that says it's because of a well-regulated militia. These are guns going to people who are part not of some Proud Boys militia, but one regulated to protect the government if there is no army. And now it's gone completely out of control. And the only answer I'd give to you about what Justice Sotomayor said is, knowing the hypocrites on this court, their green light to a president with immunity to exercise unitary executive expanded powers, there's a little footnote unwritten. Yeah, if you're a Republican president. If you had a Democratic president who said, I'm going to unilaterally, with an executive order, ban assault weapons, this Supreme Court, as soon as it possibly could, would take an expedited review of that case and say, that's not what we meant. That's unconstitutional. So they're willing to give those powers to Trump and have guns and bullets and the most destructive kind proliferate, and silencers and everything else that has nothing to do with hunting or sport. And we're not in a good place. And for all that talk about how guns kill people, people don't kill people. People with guns kill people.
Well, and also, there are hypocrisies upon the hypocrisies here. Clearly, one of them is that it refers to a well-regulated militia, and that it they interpret it as saying that you can't regulate the guns, even though it's implicit that you could regulate the militia. It's actually said that. And that's why I think Chief Justice Berger said this is one of the greatest frauds ever perpetrated on the American people. But it's also why I think, you and I've talked about this. I think Democrats need to, they need their own Project 2029. They need a clear plan when they go in. And frankly, I'm kind of one of those scorched earth Dems who's a little sick of Republicans doing whatever they want, with no regard for norms or rules or standards or even laws anymore. And I think the Democrats are going to need to come in and do some things. And you've written about this better than anybody else about, what should be the fate of the filibuster and what should be the fate of some of the rules of the Senate. But I think as we list the things that could have profound consequences, the Democrats have been afraid to do. And by the way, including our last Democratic president, Joe Biden, who called for review of the Supreme Court and took it and put it directly into the trash bin. He did not do anything with it. Should the Supreme Court have 13 members? There are, there are that many judicial districts now in the United States. It makes sense to do it. Has the Supreme Court always had 9? No, it has not always had 9. Should there be term limits? Should there be other things we can do to regain rationality? Should that mean Washington, D.C. and Puerto Rico should be states, or the bigger states should be broken up so their representation is fairer, so you don't have California with the 4th largest economy in the world, bigger than virtually every other major nation with just a couple of exceptions, with the same number of Senate seats as Wyoming. I'm interested in the radical Norm Ornstein. If a president came in and said, what do we do that's going to really make a difference? What should it be?
We do need major reforms. And I've, crafted some and listed a bunch of others. You've mentioned a number of them. The Senate is going to be a huge challenge going forward. Another hobby horse of mine. Put Trump aside. God, I wish we could. But if we end up going past this era and move into something else, we still have a crisis of legitimacy because we are almost at a point where 70% of Americans live in just 15 of our 50 states, which means 30% of Americans will elect 70 senators. And they do not represent the country, the diversity of the country, the economic dynamism of the country. And we're going to have a crisis of legitimacy. We need to alter the Senate. That will take a constitutional amendment. We ought to enlarge the House to change those districts. And there are ways to do it that would be workable. We need to have change in the rules in the Senate so that you can't have the burden on the supermajority to try and get anything meaningful done. We need to dramatically change the Supreme Court. And I agree with you on having 13 members and having term limits and having a code of ethics that's meaningful.
Yes.
But, my proposal there is you don't just need a code of ethics that seems tough on the surface if nobody enforces it. And you cannot rely on the courts to police themselves any more than you can rely on doctors to police themselves or lawyers to police themselves or members of Congress to police themselves. So I had a hand in creating and crafting the Office of Congressional Ethics in the House because you needed an independent outfit that could at least take allegations and build them into something that then the Congress itself under the Constitution could do something about, but they've been feckless in doing anything about that. What I want is an Office of Judicial Ethics that enforces an ethics code that consists of former judges and experts on legal ethics, and let them, recommend punishment for those who violate the code. And you would get a lot different kind of behavior. Instead, you have a Clarence Thomas who over and over again deliberately neglects to disclose the outrageous ethical misconduct trips and other goodies given to him in large amounts, often by those who have interest before the court. And each time it happens, and he's discovered with his hand in that proverbial cookie jar, he says, "Oops, well, it was just an oversight, and I'll disclose it now in retrospect." He did that more than 15 years ago, I believe was the first time. And then he's kept doing it, which makes it clear it's not an oversight, it's deliberate cover up. And nobody's going to do anything about it unless you have an ability to act on that. So there are a lot of things that we need to do structurally to change the political system, which will not be easy to do. But let's face it, David, in the immediate term, where we need triage as an autocracy marches forward, we're not getting what we need from Democrats.
Yeah, we're definitely not. But I want to encourage you. In fact, maybe you and I can go write this for someplace. But I'd like to see, a 10-point plan, a 12-point plan of structural reforms the Democrats need to plan to come in and do. And by the way, some of them have to, some of them are a little subtler. I'll give you one that I think is sort of under the radar at the moment. But I've talked to some people who are in the judiciary. And, historically, they get protected by people like marshals. But the marshals report to the Justice Department. And the Justice Department reports to the President of the United States. And frankly, they're concerned. They're concerned that they are not secure if the President of the United States doesn't like their politics.
One of the first things he did was to fire the head of the Marshals Service to replace him with a crony.
Right. And I think there are certain steps, but, for the security of each of the branches of the government where things need to explicitly not be under the control of the executive.
Yeah, absolutely the case. And I've talked about structural reforms in the bag of promises that Democrats should make, things that they'll pledge to do. We also obviously need voting reforms.
Yep.
To make it easy for people to vote and to guarantee those who are eligible the absolute right to vote. And we need campaign finance reforms back to keep a system from being completely tilted by multi-billionaires who pour huge sums in and who, as Elon Musk pretty much said to Donald Trump, "I bought and paid for you, and this is how you treat me."
That's absolutely right. I mean, this has been the third rail, and every time a couple of people bravely stand up and offer a few tepid campaign finance reforms, they get crushed. But Citizens United is the beginning of, this darkest period in our modern history, because essentially what it says is money is speech. If you have more money, you have more speech. If you have more speech, you can drown out everybody else. And that's why sitting behind Trump when he was inaugurated were billionaires. They were not Supreme Court members. You've pointed this out here, right? Yeah. And that is how the balance of power in our society has shifted. And we can see it. Take this big, ugly bill that is in front of the Senate right now, and this provision that there shall be no regulation of AI by any of the states for the next 10 years. I mean, ludicrous, dangerous, preposterous. And who put it there? Citizens United put it there.
Sure.
John Roberts put it there. Elon and Peter Thiel and the others helped him get there. This is, we see this all over the place, particularly since we're living, and again, I don't understand it, Norm. I mean, we only have let's go a little longer, but I don't understand how the American people tolerate the level of corruption in the United States government right now. Where Trump is like issuing Trump phones, changing everything. I thought about what you were saying about voting, because I thought in any sane country at this point, they're planning how do they move to electronic voting, which with blockchain and so forth, you can make quite secure. Well, the Republicans are dead set against it because it makes it easier to vote. Meanwhile, they're pushing hard to make Bitcoin and cryptocurrency sort of a replacement for the dollar, despite all those issues with that. But talk to me a second about when you're lying in bed at night, um, after completing a Ironman triathlon or whatever it is you do at the end of the day to unwind. You're like, what about this corruption? Don't the American people care? Is this going to become the norm too?
So, a couple of explanations for that. One part of it is that when we've had scandals before, they're in administrations or involving groups of people who have one or two, and the press corps covers them for days or weeks and in depth. Let me even take you back to what was a non scandal, Whitewater with Bill Clinton, where he and his wife Hillary had invested in a land deal because some friend of theirs said this is a great deal, and it turned out to be a bust, and they lost money on it, and it had nothing to do with any official conduct. The New York Times ran, I don't know how many, more than a dozen full front page above the fold, huge headline stories with 3 or 4 pages inside. And the signal that sent to the rest of the media world, and then ultimately to a country, most of whom don't pay a lot of attention until something really penetrates. Oh, this is a big deal. And it did as much to damage the Clinton presidency and the Clintons as anything when it was a non story. What Steve Bannon got right about so many elements of what Trump is doing is if you flood the zone with scandals, with outrageous autocratic actions, we do not have a press corps that can handle it. They might do something for a day and then it disappears. And if you're not paying the kind of attention that you and I pay to what's going on in this country and around the world, if you're living your life, you're working, you're dealing with family matters, whatever it might be, this stuff is just going to wash right over you and you're not going to understand it. And then I think we have another set of problems. One is, as Daniel Patrick Moynihan wrote, we've defined deviancy down. Corruption is not what it used to be. That's partly because the Supreme Court has redefined corruption so that most of what we know is full-scale corruption. They say, nah, that's just normal politics. That's John Roberts' handiwork yet again. And then we have another reality, which is, let's take CNN. How much time has CNN devoted to the scandal of Joe Biden and the cover-up of his mental condition, in which it became, in effect, the home shopping network for Jake Tapper and his book? And how much do we put that alongside what they've done to cover Trump selling access to the president for $5 million for a private dinner, $1 million for a dinner with a few tables, to creating a Trump phone and a Trump media company, knowing that the FCC, the Federal Communications Commission that regulates these things, is run by a Trump lickspittle, Brendan Carr. And so all the other cell phone companies and electronics companies know that if they don't open up the doors to what Trump is doing, then the FCC is going to go after them. And then you've got the Trump coin and selling the coin. And we have companies openly admitting that they're buying $20 million worth of Trump coins that goes right into his pocket. Utterly worthless thing, so they can get access to him.
Or
How
that
many
mother,
coins are you getting on this?
the mother who gave $1 million to Trump to get a pardon
Get a
for her
pardon,
son.
pay for play pardons, and pay for play to get access to the president, and all going right into his pocket. We have, David Frum wrote a piece in the Atlantic basically saying, we've never seen corruption like this in America, not even anything close. You see it in Russia. You've seen it in many African countries. And it's shrugged at by
Well,
our American
and
press.
and look, last time around, Jared walked away with $2 billion to manage, despite never having managed anything at all. Currently, Trump has got business deals in, I don't know, dozens more countries around the world. Everywhere he goes, they're doing it,
Yeah.
including many countries who are not, our allies. I recall they were, doing one in Serbia, in which they were supposed to help erect a monument condemning NATO as part of the deal for the thing.
Yeah.
And we've just sort of all swallowed hard and said, yeah, this is the norm. And we have to contend with the future. We can't just say, oh, Trump's particularly corrupt. It'll go away when we get rid of him. Because look at Congress. Look at your friends in Congress who are buying and selling stocks based on insider information now openly. Oh, there were two guys. I saw a story the other day, a Democrat and a Republican, who bought a bunch of defense stocks before Israel attacked Iran. Marjorie Taylor Greene. I can give you 100 examples of it.
Sure.
It wouldn't be tolerated in any other country.
No, and it's defining deviancy down yet again, and these are going to be precedents for the future, and it's deeply disturbing. And I should add, it's not just Trump and not even just the people in Congress. We know that he's used the threat of tariffs to shake down countries. So countries that are savvy enough basically have been saying, okay, we'll put up a Trump golf course, resort, casino, and we'll have a different kind of deal on the tariffs. We know that many countries were told that if they didn't install Elon Musk's Starlink terminals, they would face higher tariffs. We also know that Elon Musk himself, when he went to create DOGE, the Department of Government Efficiency, what an ironic name, that his first goal it wasn't just blowing up government. It was taking out the agencies and the officials who were trying to regulate his misconduct, the misconduct of his companies, workplace misconduct for Tesla, safety misconduct for SpaceX, and more. And he succeeded in basically undermining all of those efforts, what government does to maintain safety and honesty. So this is all over the place, and we know it's going to get worse before it gets better.
Yeah, and by the way, the reason that Elon was brought to heel by Trump was, I think, a clear threat to a bunch of his businesses that depended on government contracts.
Yes.
And which Trump made publicly. Publicly, he said, maybe we should cut off all the contracts. And
Yeah.
within days, Elon was, I've thought better of this.
Yeah.
So it's just astonishing. Well, as usual, we've covered a lot of ground here. I don't feel better, but I feel more energized. I feel we really have to go and do something about all this. And I hope all of you out there who are listening to it do. We love the feedback. The past few weeks, we've been getting a lot of great feedback on this podcast, more than usual. And keep it coming, because we listen, and there are things you want us to cover or do, we will do it. And if you like what we're doing, go to the dsrnetwork.com, click on membership, for less than the price of a latte a month, become a member and support what we're doing. We're also expanding rapidly. In fact, we've grown 3 times over in what we're doing on YouTube. We're going to do more of that. And so if you're just listening to this as a podcast, go to our YouTube channel, watch the segments of the show on YouTube. More and more of what we do will be oriented towards video, because we have found that more and more of you like it. And that's, frankly, the future of podcasting, I think, is video podcasting, what once a billion years ago was called vlogging. I think it's a good opportunity to get more out of the podcast. So please join us for all of that. Please join us for our other podcasts, and please join us again next week here at Words Matter. Thanks, Norm. Bye-bye.
Thank you, David.